When 22-year-old Jake Morrison looked across the kitchen at 62-year-old Betty Richardson and smugly declared, "Maybe it's time to step aside and let the real chefs work. Your old-school techniques have no place in modern cooking," the MasterChef kitchen fell into uncomfortable silence. But what happened 90 minutes later, when Gordon Ramsay tasted Betty's flawlessly executed classic dish and declared it pure perfection that no culinary school could teach, would become the most satisfying lesson in respect and humility in competition history. This wasn't just about cooking anymore. This was about a grandmother proving that 4 decades of experience and time-tested techniques could humble any arrogant young chef who thought a diploma was more valuable than wisdom. The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer about winning a competition. This was about the moment when youthful arrogance met seasoned expertise, and about a woman who would let her lifetime of cooking knowledge speak louder than any condescending comment ever could. It started as the most technically demanding pressure test of the season. 5 contestants remained, each fighting desperately for their place in the finale. The MasterChef kitchen buzzed with intense energy as Gordon Ramsay prepared to announce the challenge that would separate those who truly understood cooking from those who had merely learned techniques. "Today's pressure test is about going back to basics," Gordon declared, his voice carrying the weight of culinary tradition. "You have 90 minutes to create a dish that showcases fundamental cooking techniques, proper seasoning, perfect timing, and flawless execution of classic methods. No molecular gastronomy, no modern shortcuts, just pure, traditional cooking at its finest. Classic techniques, the foundation that every great chef built their career upon, the methods that had been refined over generations, the skills that separated true cooks from those who relied on gimmicks and trends." Betty Richardson stood at her station with quiet confidence, her silver hair neatly pinned back, her weathered hands already moving with the economy of motion that came from preparing thousands of meals over 4 decades. At 62, she was by far the oldest contestant in MasterChef history, a grandmother from small-town Kansas who had learned to cook not from books or schools, but from her mother, her grandmother, and 40 years of feeding her family with love and dedication. Beside her stood Jake Morrison, fresh out of culinary school, with a degree in his hand and arrogance in his attitude. At 22, he represented everything that annoyed traditional cooks: book knowledge without experience, modern techniques without understanding, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having been truly tested. Since arriving at MasterChef, Jake had made no secret of his belief that older contestants were outdated and holding back the evolution of cooking. He constantly referenced his culinary education, dismissed traditional methods as primitive, and had repeatedly suggested that contestants over 40 should make room for the next generation. "I don't understand why they let people like her compete," Jake had said loudly during prep, gesturing toward Betty. "This is supposed to be about the future of cooking, not the past. Her techniques are probably from the 1970s. She should be home knitting, not trying to keep up with real chefs." Betty had heard every word, but chose not to respond. She had learned long ago that the best way to deal with disrespect was through results, not arguments. In her 4 decades of cooking, she had perfected techniques that Jake had only read about, mastered timing that couldn't be taught in any classroom, and developed an understanding of flavor that came only from years of trial, error, and success. "Your time starts now." The challenge began with contestants rushing to plan their approaches. Jake immediately began organizing ingredients for what he called a modernized interpretation of classic technique, essentially trying to apply contemporary methods to traditional dishes. His movement was sharp and confident, but lacked the smooth efficiency that comes from experience. Betty, meanwhile, moved with calm deliberation. She had decided to prepare her grandmother's pot roast with traditional vegetables and gravy, a dish she had made hundreds of times, but never under competition pressure. Her hands worked automatically, seasoning and searing with the precision that becomes instinctive after decades of repetition, Look at her doing the same old boring stuff, Jake commented loudly to another contestant. That's exactly what I mean about old school cooking. No innovation, no creativity, just the same tired recipes our grandparents made. The judges want to see evolution, not nostalgia. But Gordon Ramsay, observing from across the kitchen, was watching Betty's technique with growing admiration. Her knife work was economical and precise, her seasoning was confident and accurate, and her understanding of heat and timing was evident in every movement. This was cooking that had been perfected through repetition, refined through experience, and mastered through dedication. 30 minutes into the challenge, the difference between experience and education was becoming apparent. Jake was executing his modernized approach with technical competence, but his dish lacked soul. He was following formulas rather than understanding flavors, applying techniques rather than cooking with instinct. Betty, meanwhile, was building layers of flavor that could only come from deep understanding. Her pot roast was developing rich, complex aromas through perfect browning and patient braising. Her vegetables were being prepared with techniques that maximized their natural flavors, and her gravy was building depth through methods that couldn't be learned from textbooks. She's just doing basic home cooking, Jake muttered, glancing over at Betty's station where traditional techniques were creating extraordinary results. Anyone can braise meat and boil vegetables. Real cooking requires technique, innovation, skill that takes years to develop. What Jake didn't understand was that Betty's basic cooking represented exactly that: years of development, thousands of hours of practice, and techniques that had been refined across generations. Her simple pot roast required understanding of protein science, moisture control, flavor development, and timing that most culinary graduates never mastered. 45 minutes remaining, Gordon announced. Betty's dish was coming together with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Her pot roast was tender and flavorful, her vegetables were perfectly cooked, and her gravy showed the kind of silky consistency that comes only from understanding how starch, fat, and liquid interact at the molecular level. Jake was struggling now. His modernized approach was creating technical challenges he hadn't anticipated. His timing was off, his flavors were muddled, and his attempt to improve on classic methods was resulting in a dish that was less than the sum of its parts. 15 minutes, time for final plating. Betty began assembling her dish with the same methodical care she brought to every Sunday dinner she had prepared for her family. Her plating was simple but elegant, each component positioned to complement the others, the presentation honest and appealing without unnecessary embellishment. Jake was panicking, trying to salvage a dish that had become overly complicated through his attempts at innovation. His plating was fussy and overwrought, his components fighting each other rather than working in harmony. Time! Hands up! Step back! The judging began with Gordon approaching each station to evaluate the dishes. The contrast was immediately apparent. Betty's plate looked like comfort food elevated to its highest level, while Jake's looked like an experiment that had gone wrong. Gordon started with Jake's station, and his expression showed immediate concern. He tasted each component, and his face revealed disappointment with every bite. "Jake," Gordon said, after a long pause, "this dish is confused. You've taken classic techniques and tried to modernize them without understanding why they worked in the first place. The result is technically competent, but flavorless, innovative, but soulless." Jake's confidence cracked immediately. "But chef, I was trying to evolve traditional cooking to show how modern techniques can improve." "You can't improve on something you don't understand," Gordon interrupted firmly. "Classic techniques exist because they work, because they've been tested and refined over generations." Then Gordon approached Betty's station, and his entire demeanor changed. The pot roast looked beautiful, perfectly browned, surrounded by vegetables that showed ideal texture and color, finished with gravy that gleamed with proper consistency. Gordon cut into the meat and revealed perfect texture throughout. He tasted each component thoughtfully, and his expression showed genuine pleasure and professional respect. "Betty," Gordon said, his voice filled with unmistakable admiration, "this is absolutely stunning. This pot roast is cooked to perfection, these vegetables show deep understanding of timing and technique, and this gravy is silky, flavorful, and shows mastery of fundamental cooking principles." The kitchen fell silent as Gordon continued his evaluation. "What you've created here represents everything that great cooking should be," Gordon continued. "Perfect technique, beautiful flavors, and the kind of understanding that can't be taught in any culinary school. This is cooking that comes from the heart and the hands of someone who truly understands food." Gordon turned to address the entire kitchen, using Betty's achievement as a teaching moment that everyone needed to hear. "Let me tell you something about cooking," Gordon announced, his voice carrying authority that commanded attention. "There is no substitute for experience, there is no shortcut to understanding, and there is absolutely no replacement for the kind of knowledge that comes from cooking with love and dedication for decades." Gordon looked directly at Jake, his expression serious and instructive. "Jake, your comments about old-school techniques and outdated methods show a fundamental misunderstanding of what cooking really is," Gordon said firmly. "The dish I just tasted represents cooking at a level that most chefs spend their entire careers trying to achieve." Jake stood speechless, his earlier arrogance completely deflated by the objective evidence of Betty's superior results. "Betty has just demonstrated what real cooking looks like," Gordon continued. "Her techniques aren't old-fashioned, they're timeless. Her methods aren't primitive, they're perfected. And her understanding of flavor, timing, and technique is something that no culinary school on earth could teach." What happened next was unprecedented in MasterChef history. Gordon turned back to Jake with an expression that showed both disappointment and an opportunity for learning. "Jake, you have technical knowledge, but you lack wisdom," Gordon said. "You've learned techniques, but you haven't learned to cook. Today, Betty has shown you what 4 decades of experience looks like, and I hope you're humble enough to learn from it." Gordon made the elimination announcement. "Jake, your time in the MasterChef kitchen is over. Please turn in your apron." As Jake walked out, his exit was marked not by satisfaction from the other contestants, but by a sense that justice had been served, that respect for experience and wisdom had triumphed over arrogance and dismissiveness. "Betty," Gordon said, turning to the woman who had just delivered a master class in fundamental cooking, "you're not only safe from elimination, you've just taught everyone in this kitchen what real cooking excellence looks like. This dish would be welcome at any table in the world." The episode became legendary because it represented something viewers deeply valued, seeing experience honored, wisdom respected, and the understanding that some things can't be learned from books or bought with tuition money. Betty went on to win the entire MasterChef competition, and her victory speech focused on the importance of learning from those who came before us, of respecting traditional techniques, and of understanding that innovation should build upon foundation, not replace it. Today, Betty teaches cooking classes that focus on fundamental techniques and traditional methods. Her students range from culinary school graduates who want to learn what their education missed, to young home cooks who want to understand cooking at its most essential level. Jake, humbled by his experience, eventually apologized to Betty and asked to study under her guidance. He learned that true culinary education comes not just from schools, but from those who have spent their lives perfecting their craft, because that's what Betty Richardson taught everyone that day. That experience is the greatest teacher, that traditional techniques exist because they work, and that the most profound culinary knowledge comes from those who have dedicated their lives to understanding food at its most fundamental level. If you enjoyed this story about experience triumphing over arrogance, you can watch more videos that celebrate traditional cooking wisdom and respect for elders on our channel. Subscribe to stay updated with stories that remind us that the best teachers are often those who have spent decades perfecting their craft.